The groundwork is already laid, so I'm just going to get into the order in which I do actual revelation. And it's not in the order that the book is in. I already went through the first chapter, which is a very important chapter. Then once I get groundwork laid, I'll probably get to Revelation 17, and that's what we're going to do today, because the object today is set the time when this is happening. There are historical notes in the Revelation itself to make it pretty clear when we're talking about. And in 17, we have, I have it on the screen here if you'd like to follow along there, or you can get your own Bible, whatever Bible you use. I've been trying out the new Bible, and I'm trying to think of the name of the author. I put it up on Facebook at one time. For some reason, I can't get it right now, as usual. Can't remember names. But it's a brand new, very, very controversial translation. Let me go get it. It's David Bentley Hart. And if you can see it, I'll show it to you here. David Bentley Hart. This is something else. It's quite a literal translation, as literal as you can get, and where it's not so easy to get it literal, there are notes in there. There are a lot of notes on the various passages that were added to and taken away there as well. So you can actually go to the manuscripts if you'd want to, and then you can see where in the manuscripts they've been taken out. And some of them are quite important for our understanding of the New Testament and New Testament faith. Not only that, but Revelation also. I went through all the passages that I usually test in a scripture to see if they're correct, and this got every one of them. Revelation 19:5 is a very important interpolation. Some scribe has put something in there that really messes up the entire chapter 20. If you're ever looking at it again, and you read chapter 20, you get down to 5, you find the whole idea of the author broken by one verse that's thrown in there off that really throws people off. But we'll get to that some other time. Revelation 17, and there came one of the 7 messengers or angels who were having the 7 vials, should be bowls there. And he spake with me, saying to me, Come, I will show thee the judgment of the great whore. Take a look at the words in the Greek for great whore. Pornes megales. Pornes, pretty easily understood by us. And of course, megales means great or big. The great whore who is sitting upon the many waters. Many waters is symbolic for many peoples, oftentimes. It also is significant in Old Testament prophecy for many troubles, troubled waters. This whore is the one whom the kings of the earth did commit whoredoms. And again, we have apornusan, that is past tense, and made drunk from the wine of her whoredom, porneas, were those inhabiting the earth. That is, as we explained last time, the empire. When they're talking about the earth, it's talking about the empire. Oh, thank you. I got my screen share off. Thank you for letting me know. Well, this is from Young's Literal, by the way. And he carried me away to a wilderness in the spirit. a wilderness, a desert, a deserted place, a place like a stage. Being carried off into the wilderness is like setting a stage for something. We find this in a number of other chapters, including chapter 10, where you have the great Colossus, 1 foot in the sea, 1 foot on the land, carrying away to set up a vignette of what he's talking about in your mind. Since at that time they really couldn't transfer pictures around, he has to build the picture in your mind. And he says, I saw a woman sitting. There's another very interesting word, kathamenein, used only once in the scripture. I'm going to have to look and do a little bit of research on that word, because if it's the only time this word is used in regards to somebody sitting, I want to know why. It's such a common verb. Why is it that this is different than any other verb? I'm thinking katha can mean a couple of things. It can be according to, or it can mean cleanliness. And also, the menen can mean in the middle, or it can mean a person. We have to go look again, but used only one time, that's unusual. There are several models of the one who was the great whore in that time. Very, very notorious women. Among them was Cleopatra in the 100 years before. Cleopatra was, well, I got a picture of her here. Not so beautiful, right here. Here's Mark Antony, the general and the Roman rebel that Cleopatra ended up with, and they both committed suicide, if you remember your movie with Liz Taylor and Richard Burton. I know that's probably too old for you, but that's the one I remember. A second woman was Valeria Messalina. Where's she? Here she is in an official sculpture. But this was the greatest whore ever known in Rome, known throughout the world because her picture was on the money at this time, still. And you might remember my story of when her husband Claudius was off to Britain to try to subdue a British rebellion. Messalina set up a contest to see how many, to see if she could beat the second biggest whore in town with the number of men that they had in the course of 24 hours. Messalina won. Claudius came home, found out about it, had her executed. This is probably more like the real Messalina here. This is a modern day conception on computer graphics. I would imagine that's why Claudius, who stuttered bad and was somewhat addled in his legs and seemed like an extremely odd character, but he was the emperor. He got him the girl he wanted, and that's who he wanted. But she was well known as a notorious harlot. There, I'm trying to use the right word now. And then there's Poppaea Sabinus. Some say this is the woman that Paul tried to marry. But Poppaeus was the second and last wife of the Emperor Nero. While he was still married before, he had his friend, who was a homosexual, Otho, who later became emperor for a day, to marry her so she wouldn't marry anyone else until he got rid of his first wife, who he sent to Pandateria, a little island in the Mediterranean, to starve to death. That is where Roman exiles went, among other places, but Pandateria had nothing on it but a small cabin, and the only food that would be around there was somebody would bring it in. Many, many royal Romans died on Pandateria. So this is Poppaea. She was also privy to the writings of Paul. We talked a little about Seneca being Paul's guardian, and Seneca bringing the letters of Paul to the palace for Nero and Poppaea to read. And over the course of those 8 or 10 letters, there's something you should really read or listen to my recordings of them. We find the imperial office of Nero turning over the course of a few years against the writings of Paul and the Christians, until there needed to be somebody to blame the fire on of Rome, where Nero burned Rome down and so-called fiddled while it burnt, and him trying to find a scapegoat might well have been through Seneca and Paul's letters. That's what I think so. Take a look sometime at my presentation at jspresents.org called, Seneca and Nero, or Seneca and Paul. So there were these women that were dallying with various high-placed people, trying to find themselves a very high place, understanding that in that time, women were not allowed to be alone or go alone in Rome proper. They had to have a guardian of some kind or an agent of some kind. And if they weren't married by 17, the government would either find them a husband, or the government would force them to get married to somebody, or the government would just assign someone to take care of them. They could not go any place without the male guardian or agent coming along, or the husband. This is why in Rome, these young girls, the common girls down to age 13 or 14, were married off to much, much older men, many of which were already married at the time, but were able to desert their wives or have them committed to death through charge of adultery. So generally for the common people, the husbands of the maids would be quite a bit older, with the commoners starting to marry at 13 in arranged marriages. Oftentimes before the marriage, they had no idea, these young girls who were there marrying. And the older ones, about 17 or so. And because there was no status for women, also take a look at jspresents.org on the women of Rome. You'll learn a lot about why Paul does what he does. Women at that time and their parents or guardians tried to get them married to some higher station than themselves, so they could rise in status and be able to obtain money in order to finance their entire families. Unfortunately for Poppaea, who seemed to be coming around, tradition tells us that she became a believer at the end of her life. Nero suspected her of adultery as well, which she probably did, and then kicked her to death and their unborn child as well. Again, I bring up the movie Quo Vadis, which you'll see in graphic detail a lot of what I'm explaining here. Here's Nero. Isn't he handsome? Ruled 14 years, just like Adolf Hitler, worked on genocide. At the end of his life, of course, against the Christians, the last 3.5 years of his life, that is, from the burning of Rome until his death. So we get back to the woman. She's on a scarlet-colored beast, which I understand from a little later in the passage. It's a spiritual characterization of the Roman Empire and its religions. Full of names of evil speaking, or in Greek it's blasphemy, having 7 heads and 10 horns. And the woman was arrayed with purple and scarlet color, and gilded with gold and precious stones and pearls. And if we take these purple, scarlet, gold, gemstones, and pearls, we get the idea of, from the purple, of royalty, from the scarlet, of blood, bloodiness, from the gold, expensiveness and gemstones, which were hauled in from all over the world, and the beautiful pearls, which were not natural to the Roman environment. They had to come from all over the world, and therefore this person who is gilded with gold is being seen as a very, very empirical person with lots and lots of wealth. And in her hand is a cup full of abominations. We remember another cup earlier, that is the cup that contained the blood of the saints. And this is a play off that. One's a type, the other's an archetype. And that word abominations, we find that occasionally in the scripture, and it's hard to define, and it's defined in various ways. Primarily, I think, as I have said before, it means to be sick of something, or sick to your stomach about something, or the feeling of throwing up, or I've eaten something rotten. But in the greater mind, synonyms here are atrocity, for abominations, disgrace, horror, obscenity, outrage, evil, crime, monstrosity, anathema or curse, bane, detestation, loathing, hatred, aversion, antipathy, revulsion, repugnance, abhorrence, odium, execration, disgust, horror, hostility. Remember how the Roman Empire had brought in an abomination of desolation into the temple at this time, bringing Roman soldiers into the city of Rome itself, and Pilate having the placard of the Roman eagle set up on the side of the temple, and the constant attempts by Roman governors and emperors to make the temple a place of worship for the gods of Rome or the emperors themselves. And in the last days of Jerusalem, you might remember that the emperors themselves were the Zebaim, the sacrifices were for their health and welfare, which drove the zealots and those Torah-centric people in Israel crazy. So we are seeing, even in the writings of Josephus at this time, they begun to sacrifice unclean animals in there on the altars to Yahweh, and sacrifice clean animals for the wealth and benefit of the emperor, who was destroying their religion anyway. And I guess we can understand now that the abomination of desolation in the temple is just not the sacrifice of a pig in the time of Daniel. Not at all. There was constant abomination there, including King Agrippa building a high porch on his palace to bring foreign dignitaries in to barbecue there and eat while they watched the temple sacrifices, and the zealots climbing up to the side of the temple to tear down the Roman eagles, attacking soldiers for their standards, which they worshipped, and building a wall high enough to keep the king of the Jews from seeing their sacrifices. There was incredible turmoil in this place, and Rome tried to come in at first, and they battled and got into Jerusalem, but they were repelled, and the entire Roman legion was destroyed on their march away back to the capital city of Caesarea. So all this foment was going on, and it was unlike anything that the world had ever seen or ever will see. So now we look at the uncleanness of a whoredom. What this is talking about in biblical terms is body fluids, blood, semen, saliva, and feces. Now, imagine this beast with a scarlet whore on it. Consider what her intention is and what she is sitting in despite her rich appearance is abominable filth. And upon her forehead, there was a name. Forehead happens quite a few times here. The mark of the beast on the forehead or on the hand. Also on the forehead was the mark of Yahweh. We get that from, is that Ezekiel chapter 2? Where we have the Tau on the forehead to mark those who are Kadosh Yahweh. The secret or mystery or religion called Babylon the Great. So the author here is talking about, well, if we change the words a little bit, the religion called Babylon the Great, the mother of whores, and the abominations in the earth. And of course, we're going to think of Rome because we are been told that that is not only Rome at that time, but Rome of the future with popes and everything. Steve just came up and told me that the Pope is about to be arrested for crimes against humanity. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine the armies of Italy fighting against the Swiss guards outside the Vatican, trying to take Pope Francis into custody? Well, we'll see. If that happens, it'll be the most game-changing thing in the whole history of religion, at least back 17 centuries. 1 Peter 5:15 identifies Rome because he talks about the church or the ecclesia, the assembly that is in Babylon, elected together with you, salute you, and so does Marcus, my son. I'd like to work with that a little bit if I had time. I think we could identify him. Maybe that John Mark, maybe not. Marcus is a strictly Roman name. This Babylon the Great also signifies Jerusalem. Look here in Revelation 9. We'll skip up there just a minute. After these things, I heard a great voice of a great multitude in the heavens saying, Alleluia! The salvation and the glory and the honor and the power is to Yahweh our Elohim. Because true and righteous are his judgments, because he didn't judge the great whore who did corrupt the earth in her whoredom, because he did judge, and he did avenge the blood of his servants at her hand. Now, what city was destroyed here? It's hard to think that a heavenly chorus would be praising Elohim for destroying Jerusalem. But that's exactly what happened. We find Yeshua and his army supervising the whole thing from Mount Zion and from the Mount of Olives. And we see that Yahweh, through the prodigies that Josephus talks about, is very active in bringing forth what the prophets call the day of the Lord, which if you look back to see what that is, it means the destruction of Palestine and Jerusalem, and especially its religion and its temple. And as for those in Hosea it talks about who are looking forward to such a day, Hosea says, why would you be looking for a day of gloom and darkness? But there are people today still looking for this, which is already past, and they are licking their lips and quenching their hands, waiting for war, for Israel to be destroyed so they can go off in a rapture, licking their lips for violence and for the Arab countries coming in and expecting then that Christ will come to fight them. But here we see something quite different in Revelation. We see Messiah coming to overseeing the destruction of Jerusalem on the day of the Lord. It's like John says in chapter 1, I was in the Spirit on the Hemorah Kurakai, the day of the Lord, a day of darkness, when the sun will be dark and the moon will be full of blood. So here we have a tale of two cities, Jerusalem and Rome. And I saw the woman drunken with the blood of the saints, the kadoshim, if you will. The word there is just an adjective. It's holy, agia, kadoshim. And from the blood of the witnesses, in Greek again, martyrion, martyrs of Yeshua. And I did wonder, having seen her, with great wonder. And the messenger said to me, for what reason didst thou wonder? Next, we have a literary clue of who this messenger is. You can't see it in English, except in Young's version. Because if you'll notice right here, two eyes in there. Ego ero. I will tell. But this word is completely unnecessary because this one says, I will tell. He's saying there, I will tell. How does that identify him? Because in the New Testament, only one other person talks like that. I am the door of the sheep. I am the good shepherd. It's a literary device that you can't see in English because the verb here, epo, with an O ending, it means I. I will tell you. I will tell. But he emphasizes this as an identification of who this messenger is by using the more emphatic way to say this, just like Yeshua did throughout the Gospel of John, every place. He uses this emphatic version. So I'm saying this is Messiah in the form of the angel of Yahweh, who is guiding him through and explaining these things to him. And notice the angel always says of John, what do you think this is? John always says, I don't know. What do you think it is? You tell me. I will tell thee the secret or the mystery or the religion, all meaning the same word, of the woman and the beast that is carrying her, which hath the 7 heads and the 10 horns. The word beast. This again, another poor translation of the word therion. A therion is a wild man. A therion is a wild, lawless animal, not a beast. They use the word, 2 different words for beast in Revelation. One is zon, which means a living creature, and the other one here, therion, which is a beast. You know, there's a contemporary, I guess it's rock group called Therion. This is where they get it from, certainly the Bible. This is a wild man or a wild animal, somebody completely unlawful, without any kinds of mores or without any kinds of pathos at all. The secret mystery of the woman and of the therion that is carrying her, which hath the 7 heads and the 10 horns. And now he begins to explain. The therion that thou didst see, the wild thing you saw, it was, and it is not, and it is about to come. That tells me, in a literary sense, that it is entirely anti-Yahweh, anti-Elohim. For he is the one who is, who was, and who is forever. Here we have the very opposite. And that's exactly what he's saying. This is the very opposite. And he's to come up out of the abyss and go away to destruction. And wonder shall those dwelling upon the earth whose names have not been written upon the scroll of the life from the foundation of the world, beholding the beast that was and is not, although it is. The people of the world have no idea. The people of the world at that time had no idea. But there was one movement that did, and that was the Essene movement. They had more than enough understanding of what was coming. Paul, in several of his letters, talks about don't bother to get married, say. Don't bother to do this or do that. There's not time enough. He knows exactly what's going on, and he finally explains himself in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5 and in 2 Thessalonians 2. Something is about to happen in a twinkling of an eye. We're not talking about a secret rapture for today. We're talking about the entire times and the change of the age and the end of the age coming any time. Same things we did last week with the Olivet Discourse. And I mentioned that in Revelation, the testimony of Yeshua that's spoken of there many times is the Olivet Discourse, the prophecy of what was happening in exactly 40 years from the time he prophesied. So the people of the earth whose names had not been written in the scroll of life or the book of life, they had no idea. But those among the apostolic band and the followers of the apostolic band knew exactly. Too much time has passed here. If we were under the authority of the Chinese, we might feel the same way. Anytime something horrible is going to happen. But we're not in that situation here. And in the United States, we are not the most evil country in the world. We're one of the most moral and giving countries in the world, no matter what you think about it. Stack them up now. Stack them up objectively. And you tell me if this country is deserving of all this interpretation of the revelation that is wrong. Stars coming down and destroying everything. Beasts coming for you. Thieves sneaking into your house. Has it happened to you? It's happened to all of us in some petty fashion. But is it going to happen to the whole country or the world? Not any more than it is now. And if it does, it's not going to be as a result of this prophecy, because this already happened. He's talking about another time. Let's go to a quick discourse. The Therion, the beast. The modern equivalent is the religion called Therion or Thelema. They both mean the same thing. Thelema is the god in this religion, and that god is the consort of Babylon, another god. Thelema and Therion means the same thing. For this religion, and here's a symbol. This is called the unicursal hexagram. Now, when Blaise Pascal put it together, he was doing something mathematically. But when Aleister Crowley put it together, he was forming a new religion that is actually a religion, and a lot of people do follow this religion. The tenet of that religion is, do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law. Love under will. We can interpret that as being something good. But for what I want personally to be the law of the world, I don't think so. You've heard of Aleister Crowley. He was a very foul person. He was a satanic entity, and if there was ever a Satan on earth, it would have been him in the guise of personhood. Hold on just a second, please. I don't know what's happening. Keeps being turned up. Okay. Sorry. Anyway, there's a little something for you to look into if you want to see what the extension of the Mystery Babylon is. That's probably it right there. But we must move on. Here's the mind as having wisdom. The 7 heads are 7 mountains. We can translate that hills, mons, upon which the woman doth sit. It's always interpreted as Rome. Yes, Rome sits on 7 hills. Here they are. Aventine, Caelian, Capitoline, Esquiline, Palatine, Quirinal, Vimial Hill. Jerusalem also is set on 7 hills. We don't hear about all 7. But if you look at the cities that claim to be set up on 7 hills in Wikipedia, you'll find that it is. Scopus, Olivet, the Mount of Corruption, Mount Ophel, the original Zion, the new Mount Zion, and the hill on which the Antonia fortress was built. It was right next to the temple, where they housed the Roman armies here that were defeated in that first battle of the war. And there are 7 kings. This is where we're going to get our historical notation. 5 did fall. The one is. There it is. The other did not yet come. And when he may come, it behooveth him to remain a little time. And the beast that was and is not, he also is 8th. And out of the 7th he is, and to destruction he doth go away. This tells us when and who. The Roman Empire began after the murder of Julius Caesar. When was that? About 40 BC. And here come the emperors. The first is Octavian, also known as Augustus, or Augustus is mentioned in the New Testament in conjunction with the birth of Yahshua. He ruled until 14 AD, a long, long time. The second that came in was Tiberius. And all of these people are so corrupt and ridiculously insane, it's almost impossible to imagine how these guys could last at all. Tiberius was finally murdered in his bed with a pillow on his face as an old man, murdered by the next one, Caius. He'd used Caius as a boy toy. Caius, or Caligula, was his nephew. And when Tiberius went off and left Rome for good, remained the emperor, but went to the island of goats, he took the young Caius, Caligula, with him and used him as a sex toy. Tiberius did terrible things on that island. Trying to think of what the name of the island is. Capri, Isle of Capri, means goat island. Caligula himself then was murdered because he was a sociopath and so cruel. We can't even imagine his oddities and cruelties. It's very entertaining if you are a sadist. There are lots and lots of videos online about Caligula. The fourth was Claudius that came. He's mentioned in the book of Acts. Claudius was the one who was forced to do something to bring power to his name. Claudius was crippled. He had a bad stutter. He drooled all the time. And he tried his best, because so many of his relatives were being murdered by those that were in power. He tried his best to be like a little mouse behind a curtain and tried to convince people that he was insane, but he was not, or that he was retarded, but he was not. After Caligula was stabbed in the arena, the Praetorian Guard came looking for him to make him the new emperor. You see, because he seemed so enfeebled that the Praetorian Guard, that were mostly Germans that were working personally to protect the emperor, wanted Claudius, the retarded man, to be the emperor so they could do anything they wanted with him, get anything they wanted out of him. And so here's Claudius. I hope I'm not mixing this up with Lady Macbeth, but they invade his room in the palace, and he's shivering behind a curtain because he knows he's going to be murdered right along with Caligula, but he's not. They take him out, put him on their shoulders, and they walk out declaring him emperor. And who's going to argue with the Praetorian Guard, the 50,000 number of troops from Germany that are protecting the palace? No one. So Claudius becomes the emperor. Number 4. He's the one that married Messalina, whom he had murdered because of her adulteries. But his last wife was Agrippina, his niece. We find the prohibition of niece marriage, anyway, in the Dead Sea Scrolls and in the Torah. He marries his niece, who has this child named Domitian Ahenobarbus, better known as Nero. And so Agrippina, the new wife of Claudius, gets rid of him by feeding him a poison mushroom, his favorite thing to eat. Fix that up. He died right at the table, along with half of the other ones that were in the banqueting hall, including Claudius's son, the one that was supposed to be the emperor. She had him killed too. And then when Nero came, her son, at the age of about 16, Nero had his mother killed because she was meddling too much in his sinful affairs. He built her a boat with a lead bottom and a sunroof made of lead. And at the right time, sent her out with this for a birthday present, rigged it so the lead roof would collapse, and it did. It came down upon her and her servant, her best friend, killed the servant, but not Agrippina. So in case that happened, Nero had some of the Praetorians and his friends waiting on the banks for her to swim up at night. And they did away with him with knives. All right, with her, I should say. After Nero in 68 died, we had the year of so-called 4 emperors, but 3 of them were never emperors. The Senate brought in the head of the army in Spain. His name was Galba. He didn't last but a few months because he told the Praetorian Guard, "I'm not giving you any raise." So they killed him. The next one that came was a young friend of Nero, who actually had shared a wife and shared all kinds of debauchery. He had actually married Poppaea Sabinus, Nero's last wife, in order, like I said, to keep her from marrying someone else until he could kill his first wife. And this Otho was his name. He came back to take power. A few months later, he had to kill himself because he had a greater army coming from Germany with the 3rd proposed emperor of the year. That was Vitellius, a big glutton, large man, whose life was that of debauchery and eating and drinking himself into oblivion. He brought his armies from Germany to Rome to see to the end of Otho. Otho killed himself, and this guy was able to come into Rome, bringing all his troops from foreign places, troops that had never been inside an opulent city before, and he gave them leave to take anything they wanted. And so this was the third power in what had become a civil war in Rome, and Vitellius' army burned Rome again. It just so happened that Vitellius's burning of Rome happened at the same time as Titus's burning of Jerusalem, or very close. So we see later on that as far as this great whore, she's to be burned with fire. So I say, this is a tale of two cities. You can't determine reading through the woman whether it's Jerusalem or Rome, and the fact is, it's both. Now, we'll come to the time of Nero. He burns Rome the first time in 66, and he blames the Christians. All right, at the beginning of 66, it says that you'll be under a torment for X number of days. I can't remember what it was, 1240 or something. It's 3 years and a half. This is the time that we call the Neronic persecution. Looking for a scapegoat, I think he gets into Paul's letters and starts pulling them out and starts persecuting and killing them. And you know what happened in the Neronic persecution throughout the empire. Christians were identified, or even if they weren't Christians, if their neighbor wanted what they had, they would be identified and killed. Their neighbor that turned them in would get their property. So all kinds of people were being turned in at this time. We actually have letters from a governor to an emperor asking the emperor what he should do with all these people. Certainly, they can't all be Christians. The emperor is smart. He just says, look, if they curse Christ and pour out a libation to the emperor, let them go. If they curse Christ. You know, at that time, there were two big Christianities, the Gnosticism and the Roman Church. The Roman Church felt that martyrdom was a good thing. It would send you right straight to heaven. But the Gnostics, who believe in a more spiritual doctrine, they would go ahead and say whatever they wanted to and get by and then go on and continue to preach. There was a very big slough between the two Christianities at that time, and there were others, but these were the main one, Gnostics and Orthodox. The Orthodox often were murdered, and the Gnostics got away cleanly or went to Egypt. And that's why we have texts like the Nag Hammadi Library, the Elephantine Papyruses, the Gospel of Judas, and many, many more. So this is giving us an idea when this is. This fifth king is Nero. Skip those three that never became emperors or rulers. They were just rebellious. To the sixth is Vespasian. And Vespasian and Titus are two that are really worth remembering because they are described along with the eighth, Domitian. Let's see where it is. I think it's on down. The 10 horns that thou sawest, they're 10 kings, who a kingdom did not yet receive. But authority as kings the same hour do receive with the therion, the wild man. These have one mind, and their own power and authority to the therion they shall give over. These with the Lamb shall make war, and the Lamb shall overcome them, because master of masters is he, and ruler of rulers, sovereign of sovereign. And those with him are called in choice, chosen, and steadfast. These kings and the kingdoms all sent troops to aid the destruction of Jerusalem and Israel. They had to do it. They were ruled by the beast, the greatest military power in the world at that time. And in recompense for that, these provinces were given much more authority than they had before, to the point that even in 68, the year of the four emperors, many of them began to rebel against Rome because they had so few troops out in the field. The Germans had come to Rome, the Spanish had come to Rome, and finally Vespasian, who was in Palestine, he comes to Rome too, to claim his new power as emperor, as Josephus had prophesied for him. They all sent troops. The troops were not mainly Romans, because there weren't many Romans. Slaves couldn't enlist in the armies. So there was like 60 to 75% of all Romans were slaves. There was nobody left. They had to garner troops from all over their world. So we have the 10 what do you call them? Provinces of Rome under the empire, them all getting greater power, and them also participating in a civil war. And he saith to me, the waters that thou didst see, where the whore doth sit, are peoples and multitudes and nations and tongues. That's the army. We'll see it in Revelation 13 coming up in just a minute. And the 10 horns that thou didst see upon the beast, these shall hate the whore, and shall make her desolate and naked, and shall eat her flesh, and shall burn her with fire. Same thing happening in Rome as Jerusalem. She's both. She's the mystery, the apostate religion, that which never was, isn't, and will never be in the eyes of Yahweh. This is the personified religion. You're taking the traits of a person or an animal, and you are making an inanimate object like those traits. It's called personification. For Elohim did give into their hearts to do its mind, and to make one mind, and to give their kingdom to the beast, until the sayings of Elohim might be complete. And the woman that thou didst see is the great city that is having reign over the kings of the land, over the rulers of the land. We're going to drop back and finish up in Revelation 13 now. These chapters in Revelation are not in sequential order. John uses a parallelism throughout. Take, for instance, the seals. Then you've got the trumpets. Then you have the bowls. These are three arrays that may be overlaid one upon the other. You actually have 7 assemblies and 7 blessings and others. Then there are these stage vignettes, like chapter 10, the gigantic man standing on an island, his foot in the water. And in chapter 12, with the woman in the sun, with the moon under her feet. Big, huge plays of cosmic dimensions, yet of local understanding. Revelation 13. And I stood upon the sand of the sea, and I saw out of the sea a beast coming up. Again, a therion, having 7 heads and 10 horns, and upon its horns 10 diadems. You remember this from chapter 17 we just did. And upon its heads a name of evil speaking, just like before. And the beast I saw was like a leopard, its feet of a bear, the mouth is the mouth of a lion. And the dragon did give it its power and its throne and great authority, the dragon being the devil, of course. And now we see some similarities with the beasts of Daniel. There's good reason for that, because these areas that were the countries that Daniel is speaking of in that prophecy have all come together to be Rome and its empire. Rome had all this property now, and the beast evolves from one to the other to the other. In Daniel, there's a beast, iron and clay. People say that's Rome, and it may be, but most probably it's not. Most probably it's the Seleucid Empire, the very empire of Antiochus Epiphanes, that was so mixed that constant battle was being waged. And here we find that the Revelator is giving us a new compilation of these beasts in a new one. I've got the old one, Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, Seleucia. I have kind of a graphic that I built to help me get a little more traction with this. First beast, the sea beast, coming out of the sea, coming out of the massive peoples, coming out of the massive turmoil. This thing has 8 heads, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Those that I mentioned before. The beast itself is the Roman Empire, its mysteries, its army, its ability to evoke wonderment at its power and authority. And I saw one of its heads as slain to death, and its deadly stroke was healed, and all the earth did wonder after the beast. There's 2 interpretations of this. I like them both. One is that in the death of Nero and the year of 4 emperors, when there was constant civil war, people at the time believed full well that that was finally the end of the Roman Empire. They'd had 3 fake ones come into Rome with armies, and actually the third one destroyed Rome and killed innumerable of its senators and people. And stole everything there and set it on fire. And then, who is hailed as the emperor? Somebody that is already busy. They're busy in Palestine, destroying Israel. That's Vespasian, undoubtedly the most competent of all these generals at this time. Vespasian had already used a pincer movement to destroy all of Israel, clear down to Jerusalem in no time, poisoned the wells, cut down all the trees, burned everything, killed all the livestock, shock and awe. Those on boats, he went out for and killed them all right on their boat and left them floating in the water. The water was his blood in the Mediterranean Sea. Nobody's personal well got by without being poisoned. And there was the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse were writing, which we'll get to next time. See. The mortal wound then came to Rome and was healed. The mortal wound came to Nero when, after the people turned against him for burning Rome, he was not able to even keep the Praetorian guards to guard him. So Nero kills his wife and sneaks out of the palace with somebody we know, his secretary, Epaphroditus. You'll find him in Philippians. Epaphroditus, a secretary to Paul, a good friend of Paul, and secretary to Nero and the next 3 emperors after that. Epaphroditus, he sneaks out with him to go to his cottage. You see, he was a slave. He's become a freedman because of his ability to write. A freedman for the next 30 years till he's finally caught up in his religion. Epaphroditus takes him to the house, puts him in the garage, tells him, there's only one thing you have left to do here. That's to kill yourself. That's the only way to get out of this without ruining your reputation for the last 14 years. So a dagger is brought out. Nero tries. He bewails the world for having lost the greatest artist. And then with the help of Epaphroditus, the dagger is pushed into his neck. But then, what happened? He disappears. They can't find him. Can't find his body. Finally, they find a body that they assume is his. They put it away where it should be. But all of a sudden, Neros start popping up all over the place. In northern Italy, Nero, the twin, pops up with an army. In Parthia, he pops up with a huge army. And these Nero doubles all look exactly like him and claim to be him. And a third one pops up in Moesia. So we have armies now diverging on Rome during a civil war with the dead emperor in charge of them all. So it's a legend, they say, but you can easily read about this in history, called Nero redivivus, Nero being reanimated or resurrected. What a story. Well, I won't tell you any more about that, but this is the saying that went around why this head was healed. And when we get down to the bottom of this chapter, we found out exactly which head it is, because the writer tells us. So it can be the Roman Empire, and it can be Nero, and it can be both of them. As far as we know, Nero did not get back to do his dirty work, or the fake Nero, or the Nero redivivus, because of Vespasian. He leaves Israel, and he leaves his son, Titus, in command. And that's where we get to the second beast, or therion, or wild man. And they did bow before the dragon who did give authority to the beast. Yes, they were devil worshippers. They had hundreds of devils they were worshiping. And now they had, even during the war in Jerusalem, sacrifices to these devils. And they did bow down before the therion, saying, who is like the therion? Who's able to war with it? They even called him that, therion. And there was given to it a mouth speaking great things and evil speakings, blasphemy. And there was given to it authority to make war 42 months. That's 3.5 years, right? The war lasts 7 years. There's actually, you think there's 7 years involved in this, 2 sections of 3.5, but if you look closely, there's 3 sections. There's a 3.5, a 3.5, and a 3.5. But you can look up for yourself. I might do something with that next time, if we have anybody here then. 42 months, prophetic time, not 1,260 years. Has nothing to do with us. 42 months is exactly how long that persecution lasted. And it did open its mouth for evil speaking toward Elohim, to speak evil of his name. That's why he's called in Revelation the anti-Yahweh. And of his tabernacle and those who in the sky tabernacle. And there was given to it to make war with the saints. Who did this? Nero sends Vespasian. And to overcome them. Did they overcome them? It's apocalyptic. It's come true. And there was given to it authority over every tribe, every tongue, and nation. Who was in that army? People from every tribe, every tongue, every nation, legions and legions and legions of them. And bow before it shall all who are dwelling upon the land, not the earth, whose names have not been written in the scroll of the life of the Lamb slain from the foundation of the world. Look, you guys don't believe in atoning blood? You're close to losing your salvation. I'm going to tell you that. I'm going to warn you. You have not read the scripture closely enough. You're following some wolf in sheep's clothing, telling you that Messiah is just a good example, shows us how to live. Watch out, watch out. For if anyone hath an ear, let her hear. For if anyone a captivity doth gather, into captivity he or she doth go away. If you're to go into captivity, you're going to go. What happened to 1,500,000 of those people in Jerusalem when Titus overcame Jerusalem? They went into slavery. They went all over the world. They went to Pompeii. They went to Mauritania. They went to Gaul. They went to Britain as slaves. And the women as sex objects until they were sexed to death along with the boys. That's what they did with them. If anyone ever hear, let him hear. If captivity, you'll go. If anyone by the sword doth kill, it behooveth him by the sword to be killed. Don't expect that you won't be killed if you take up against the Messiah. You're taking up against the will of Yahweh being overseen by his son. You take up a sword there, you zealots, you will go into captivity or you will be killed. The other 750,000 people in Jerusalem were killed. The temple set on fire. Here is the endurance and the faith of the holy ones, Kadoshim. Second beast, and we'll finish with this. And I saw another beast coming up out of the land. Important. This is more specific than out of the sea. And it had two horns like a lamb, and it was speaking as a dragon. Now, who am I going to show here in this beast? Well, this is an old picture of Baphomet. I put a couple faces on. Under his feet, the Mogan David. I can't remember what it says there in Latin, but if I could see it, I could tell you. It's blasphemous. Here we have Vespasian. He leads the charge. And we have a one horn, Titus, his son and general. And we have on the other horn, Domitian, his other son. I missed a little bit on the kings. I meant to go ahead and talk about the other three kings, 6, 7, and 8. I need to do that before we're done. Titus and Vespasian came together with their legions. Titus was a general. Vespasian, he was retired. Nero sent him into exile because he fell asleep at one of Nero's singing concerts. So off to exile he went. He knew he would need him again. So Nero brings Vespasian back. He's about 58 years old, and his son Titus puts them together, and here's their plan. We are going to attack from two sides by land. We're going to attack Ptolemais, while you're going to attack Ptolemais, while I attack Gamla. We're coming in a pincher movement down. They won't know what hit them. We're not even going to Jerusalem. Let's destroy everything else. We're going to do shock and awe here. This is going to be the end of this. And this is the way they came. And this is why this beast, it's the same beast. It's the Roman Empire or the army, but the two horns are the pincher movement. I should have his face up here as a pincher movement and Nero on here. Nero sent the two, and they did the job, destroying everything. This is the land beast. I will prove it here in just a minute. And all authority of the first beast doth it do before it, and it maketh the land and those dwelling in it, that they shall bow before the first beast, definitely, whose deadly stroke was healed. That's Nero. And it doth great signs, that fire also it may make to come down from the sky to the earth before men. How did he do that? We read in Josephus and Tacitus and the other historians of Rome about the incredible siege engines that these people built. Notice in Revelation it talks about the trees being destroyed. That's because every tree, for Josephus says 11 furlongs around Jerusalem, was destroyed to make siege engines and to make catapults. And what they do with these catapults, they would go down to the Dead Sea and they would bring up all this bitumen and pitch. They would roll it over the top of a boulder, and they would put stones on top of the bitumen, and then they would cover up with Greek fire, stuff that immediately explodes. Greek fire, look it up. And then they would shoot these huge boulders, as big as a person, from far distance away, till they were coming down like stars out of heaven. And the funny thing about this is that in Jerusalem, behind the walls during the siege, the men on lookout, whenever it was their time to let other people know they were coming, was that they would cry out from the walls, "Here come the sun!" No, not George Harrison's rendition. "Here comes the sun!" These things would be like giant suns or stars coming from afar over. And not one at a time. There were hundreds of these engines going at the same time. Heck, there were legions and legions of soldiers there, besides the 10th Fretensis, that were manning these things, and all kinds of volunteers from every place. It was like, in the nighttime when they would do this, more than fireworks, it would be like a bombardment of Dresden. This is what it's meant about signs in the sky and stars falling down. And indeed, even earthquakes, those are recorded there too. It doth great signs, and the fire also be made come down from the sky to the earth. And it leadeth astray those dwelling on the land because of the signs that were given to do before the beast, saying to those who dwelling upon the land to make an image of the beast that hath the stroke of the sword and did live. Here's another thing you find just in Young's, the stroke of the sword. This is exactly what happened to Nero. And there was given to it to give a spirit to the image of the beast. And also the image of the beast may speak, and that it may cause as many as shall not bow before the image of the beast, that they may be killed. We're thinking of gigantic television screens. Not so. Every Roman legion had standards. On the standard, a standard was a flag shaft. On there was a medal of Nero, and the medal of your company commander, and the medal of the general that's running the thing, plus the Roman eagles. And if this thing was stolen or taken away by the enemy, the Romans would do anything to get them back, because taking this would be considered a loss in a battle. But these people had to come, not only soldiers, they did this freely because they worshiped the emperors, but the people had to come and bow before these. They were put up on the Jerusalem temple. There were pigs and all kinds of foul animals slaughtered, and humans as well, in the Holy of Holies, killed. The Holy of Holies was used as a morgue, and piled on it were dead green corpses clear to the ceiling. You talk about something that is defaming or abominating, that would be it. But they had to worship these standards or they would be killed. And what if they didn't? That's why we had millions and millions killed there, because they did it. It probably wouldn't even take time to have them look at those standards if they weren't around. Even up till after the Second Revolt, the people, the Jews, the people that survived, had to still bow and do libation to the image of the beast, whoever was the emperor, and the mouth of that emperor was the man carrying the standard. Oh, let's see. Okay, finally, we'll get to the end. Before I do, I want to mention that back in 17, it talks about, we got up to the sixth emperor, which was Nero. No, which was Vespasian. The seventh, it said he'll be there for a short time. After Titus destroyed Jerusalem, he came back and he succeeded his father after 10 years. But Titus only lasted a year and a half. It is said that his brother, Domitian, who didn't take part in the war, put him in an ice chest for his cold and locked him in there. Titus only ruled a year and a half, but it was a good rule, and Vespasian's rule was also good. And of course, Josephus was there with them as an adopted son and secretary. But finally, Domitian, the last son, he's an eighth, because he's part of the seventh, and he goes to perdition. He's part of the seventh as an eighth because he's the brother of the seventh and the son of the sixth. And he goes to perdition because the Christians murdered him. Yes, you know Flavius Clemens? That's the one that wrote the Nazarene Acts or the Clementines. His wife, Domitilla, a cousin of Domitian the emperor, was sent to Pendateria. And then Flavius Clemens himself was killed along with Epaphroditus for being believers when Domitian was trying to bring his own religion in, that is the religion of the worship of Minerva, and he set himself up as the high priest of all religions. He couldn't take that. Domitilla, when she gets back, works with Stephanos, his valet. They were both lovers of Flavius Clemens. I know that doesn't sound so good. They both loved Clement, and they were bound to get him. And they set up a plot where Stephanos, right in the midst of what was going on in the bedroom of Domitian, took Domitian's knife out from under his pillow and stabbed him enough times to kill him before he himself was killed by the guards. It's a Christian plot to get this guy. He goes to perdition as part of the seventh and the eighth. Then you take the number 8. We're just getting into this here. You take the number 8. There it says, again, if you have wisdom, the number 8 in a little mathematical trick that they did in those days, it did a double factorial. You take, doing a factorial of a numbers like this. You take up to 8, 1 times 2 times 3 times 4 times 5 times 6 times 7 times 8, and you come up with a number. Then you do a factorial of that number you came up with the same way, and you come up with 666. So now we're going to portray the beast here, and what they're saying in Revelation 17 is that Domitian was like the retransformation or the redivivus of Nero, because he did the same things with believers. They called him Nero returned. He was an 8th, and he goes to perdition. That is the mathematical problem that you need to be wise about to figure out that 8 and 666 are equivalent. And here's understanding. Oh, do we get the mark? Oh, here's one. I'm sorry. And it maketh all the small and the great, and the rich and the poor, and the freemen and the servants, that it may give to them a mark upon their right hand or upon their foreheads, and that no one may be able to buy or sell except he who is having the mark, or the name of the beast, or the number of his name. I'm showing you the mark of the beast right here. One of them. This is a mock-up of it. This sign, which is a tax receipt, had to be given on everything that was bought or sold. You cannot buy anything, barter anything, sell anything without the receipt. And what the receipt had on it in 68 AD, the time he's writing this, is it had the name Nero on it, or an abbreviation of that, and the year in Roman numerals. And when you took all those together, it was the number of a man, and it came up to 666. This is the actual picture of it. But you can't understand the hardship of this for people, because oftentimes the tax they had to pay was more than their stuff was even worth. You think you got taxes in this country? Hold on just a second. I wonder if something's wrong with this. Something wrong here? My great. Oh, no. It keeps going crazy there.
I'm sorry, I'll try to keep an eye on it.
I'm sorry, my thermostat kept going up. It's gotten really hot in here, or it's me. Okay, let's see. Back to the mark of the beast. The reason this is so important is because, like I said, they had to have this stamp on. If they didn't and they were caught, they were put in slavery or killed. It was that simple. Everyone had to have it. Everyone doing any business, anyone trying to barter. If you were caught without this, it was into captivity or to the sword that you went. Seems like a little bit of nothing compared to some of the ways that we have machinated it in our time with RFID chips and that kind of stuff. But this is already passed. If it happens again, then, well, it's different. But look, as I've been told, if it's going to happen again, it has to happen in its fullness. Everything in the revelation has to happen. I've been looking at this my whole life. People always claim, oh, I've got it. I've got it. Here's the way it's going to play out. And it never does, not even close. Or they can take pieces of it, like Revelation 12, the woman in the sun, and they can interpret that for today. Okay, fine. What about the rest of it? It says at the end of Revelation that if you take anything or put anything into this book, you're going to get the same plagues as the book. These people might as well quit unless they've got the entire futuristic program for it, unless they want the plagues in the book. Because this is a unified book, even though it's not chronological. It is unified. And there's a purpose behind it and a unity. And it's a Jewish unity. Here's wisdom. You having the understanding, let him count the number of the beast, for the number of a man it is, and its number is 666. There's a special proof about this that I found when I was a boy in an old Bible that my great aunt had. Let me read. I read to her, and there was a footnote right here that when I understood the significance of it, it kind of blew my mind. Here's the number of his name. Formerly Nero was known as Kaiseros Neron. Kaiseros Neron. That was his legal name. You take his name in Hebrew, in Greek, but not in Latin. And you add up the numbers. Each letter is a number. And you look at all this other significant stuff in this book. Like, for instance, how 666 is written in Greek. Take a look at this, if you're not looking now. In the Bibles of that time and later on, the name Jesus Christos or Jesus was not written out in the Bible. It was covered up. In the Greek Bibles, it was right here, chi sigma, standing for Christos, chi sigma. In fact, up here earlier in the Revelation, a part I didn't get to was to show you where it was chi sigma in some of the earlier manuscripts. So they wouldn't take the name and blaspheme the name. Same thing with the Jews today, so they think. But the number 666 is chi sigma with a Z, XI, in the middle. Xi. The key here looks like an X, is worth 600. The ZXI is worth 60. And the sigma is worth 6. There's where you get 666. But look what they're making it from. They're making it from Christos, or Messiah. It's a blasphemy in itself. And of course, what this picture is of, the Dionysian fig leaf that was worn on the Greek hats that we read about in the Maccabees. So we see the fig leaf, that was a sign of the Dionysian or the Bacchanalian religion, part of the great mystery Babylon. And you see how the three leaves, or the three lobes of the leaf, are going to fit into that real well. Yeah, I'm going long because I want to get through this, because I'm going to lose you before long. The proof of this is that there's a variant, as I was mentioning. In that old King James Bible, there was actually a footnote in there that in some editions, the number is 616. That would kind of throw a moth into the soup if it were not for the fact that I took Latin in junior high school. Because in Latin, let's say in Greek, we see Kaiseros Neron as 666, but in Latin, we take that off. In Latin, it's Kaiseros Nero. And that right there is worth 50, right? So in the other editions, the number 616, because I found out through my Latin lesson, they were getting the number in Latin. They knew who it was, but it didn't fit the number with Latin. So the Latins in that day, and of course the Romans all spoke Latin and Greek, they changed the word or the number so it would fit the name that they knew it was. Did you know that only one of all those church fathers saw Revelation as a future thing? And I know I told you this, and he in his own words says, it's because if we don't put it in the future, then we're going to lose out, because every crisis is an opportunity. So the proof's in the variant reading. So we've got this mark of the beast. And right here, I found online, I don't know if I never find this again, an actual proof of what I'm saying, because here we have in an old manuscript of the Bible, if you can see that, you see the chi and the sigma and the xi in the middle. It's actually been written in over the Latin translation there in Greek letters. So it's not 666, it's not Arabic numerals, they didn't have that then. But it's got this signature there of 666. And that spells something too. I have to remember what. I don't remember right now. So let's see. If you're interested in a little more on the mark of the beast, I mean, it's hard to even believe that it's not an RFID chip, but I guarantee you in the next generation or the next 5 years, it'll be something else. Maybe it already is. I have recited a little recitation by Mark Westcott, who's one of the top exegetes in Great Britain. He's also a preterist. He reads to us about what the mark of the beast consists of and gives us that picture that I showed you before about the tax stamp and how that works. And I'm just going to put this out there on chat so you can listen to it. It's like 20 minutes long if you want. Chat, where are you? Okay. Now let's look at the chat. I'm tired. Oh, Allison, you're back. I see. Depend on it. Oh, Iraq. Gosh. Ha. What is the hope? I should tell you that. The hope is in chapter 19. This isn't about us or for us. This is about them, for them. There's nothing in there that pertains to us except chapter 19 and 20 and 21. You better read 21. Of course, these are pertaining to us. We're in a different place then. We're not there yet. It doesn't pertain yet, except in hope. Are you kidding? What's the hope? The hope for me is not to be pounded by stars and crap coming out of the sky, burning me up. That ought to be hope enough for you and anybody else. And all these idiots, I'm sorry, I shouldn't say that. All my colleagues on YouTube who are using false prophecy to destroy your faith or to get your faith in somebody that knows more than you do or says they do. All right. Amen. I'm not going to be in the middle of chaos. I'm going to look at prophecy and I'm going to look at apocalypse and I'm going to know the difference. Now, are you? Are you? I hope so. Because it's going to be time pretty soon, if you hang in here on this, that you're going to have enough to help other people that come to you and tell you, well, you better get on Michael Rood's calendar. Because if you're not on Michael Rood's calendar and you're not in the Virgin Islands at a certain time, Florida is going to sink. Or the gases of A.A. Allen are going to come over and you're going to suffocate and go to hell. Oh, give me a break. If I had the opportunity to put in an RFID chip, I would do it immediately. It's great. It's got all your medical information on there in case you, like me, have cardiac artery disease and strokes, that if you fall down someplace and don't die, somebody's very quickly going to find out what's wrong with you. Now, is there something wrong with that? Oh, mark of the beast. Ah! No need for that now. Okay, we should do a comedy show sometime. And look, another thing, it's your business. I'm just giving you a way to see through this. Man, I haven't been working with this text for all these years for nothing, or just to pass my time or to scare people to hell. That's all. Thank you. Love you, love you, love you.